Hello, we were Team 1 and we will start our presentation for the third week. Before we start today's topic, let us remind you of the 3 key points we have mentioned last week. First week is that Capitol Gate Tower has a weak foundation of soil due to its location. As we have mentioned before last week, Capitol Gate Tower is located in Abu Dhabi, where low-lying sandy deserts dominate the landscape. What is even more, it is located 200 meters away from the sea, and the sand is soft as the usual sand in the seashore. The primary soil type seen here is sandy soil, and it does not have a good bearing capacity, which means it has weak foundation. The second point is the large load due to the many materials such as concrete, steel, and glass. Also, as the building consists of 35 floors, its load would be massive. The third point is the special characteristic of our building, the leaning angle of Capitol Gate Tower. As the most leaning architecture in the world, this was a critical point to be considered in construction too. Now, why would these 3 be the key points of this week's presentation? What would these factors affect most during the construction process? Some of you may have already noticed our topic for today. This week, we will talk about the foundation of the building. As you may know, foundation is the first step of building construction. It is also a critical part of an architecture, especially for a building with a massive size and leaning angle like our Capitol Gate Tower. So, let's find out more about what kind of foundation method our architecture needed to use during construction. As I have mentioned before, 2 things had to be considered. Consideration about the site and consideration of the leaning shape. To consider the factor of the site, the building needed to find a way to stabilize the load on the soft soil in the seashore. It was hard for the foundation materials to get through to support the load, which required very deep foundation. This is why the Capitol Gate Tower construction used the pile foundation method. Pile foundation is used to insert the piles deeply to the level of hard soil. Among the methods, friction pile foundation was chosen. Friction pile foundation uses the frictional resistance force between the pile surface and the adjacent soil to transfer the superstructure load. Depending on the subsoil condition, resistance force due to friction can develop into the full length of the pile. Also, the friction pile tends to have low space, which makes it have enough resistance and relatively not requires hard strata. That is to say, friction-bearing pile foundation does not necessarily need a strong layer of ground at the end of the shaft, because it transfers weight laterally into the surrounding ground throughout the length of the pile itself. That is why this method had an advantage on our site on the seashore. So theoretically, this was the best method to use in our Capitol Gate Tower if it was standing straight. The problem occurs here. That is why we had to consider the second point, the leaning shape of the building. In the case of a leaning architecture like ours, friction pile foundation wasn't enough to resist. The overhang occurred due to the upper part of the leaned building. The pile on the opposite side of the inclination would have to endure immense amounts of tensile strength, and unable to resist more, it would collapse. The engineers felt the need to transfer the load to the depth of a bedrock, and to do so, they needed a longer pile than the friction pile. So, they decided to bring in the end-bearing pile method. The engineers decided to use different type of pile named end-bearing pile. This pile has difference in the way of resisting loads with friction pile. End-bearing piles are used to transfer superstructural load through low bearing capacity soil to the strong stratum such as rock or very dense sand and gravel. They infer most of their load carrying capacity from the resistance of the strong soil layer at the end of the pile. So, the engineers thought that they had succeeded in making safer foundation than before. But another problem arose at this point. The usual piles have refusal point so they can drive in only 25 meters. However, on this site, the layer of bedrock is under 30 meters deep. This means if they use end-bearing piles to all of the parts of the foundation, lots of money and time would be needed. It might be a good way to build a safe building, but it would be a bad way in economic terms. So, they tried to calculate the appropriate number of piles that they were going to use and where they should be installed. This would make them find the exact compromise between building a safe leaning building and also considering time and cost. They used 203 friction piles, which have 60 cm diameter, on the front side where the weight is going down into the ground due to the inclination, and 287 end-bearing piles, which have 1 meter diameter and runs to a depth of 30 meters to a bedrock to anchor tightly to the soil. These piles are in tension due to the massive eccentric overhang of the building. It may sound quite awkward that they use different lengths and diameter of piles, but it is actually a really efficient way to make foundation for world's most leaning tower. After they installed piles under the ground, the 2 meter deep 7,000 cubic meters concrete mat was laid on the top of the piles. It helped the loads of the building distribute to piles evenly. Finally, they could make a strong foundation that was initially in compression during construction to support the lower floors of the building, and now in tension as the stresses caused by the overhang that had been applied. During the construction of it, excavators had to dig 6,000 cubic meters of sand, and hundreds of piles were driven into the ground. This took them more than 8 weeks. There had to be no let-up on this schedule because Sheikh Sultan, the client of this building, wanted Capitol Gate to be completed by an impossibly tight deadline. So, the engineers had to devise a new way of stacking upper parts. Their adventure had just started, and there were more to come. These are the points of the foundation that Capitol Gate Tower has. In the following week, we are going to present how they made the core to build and install slabs in leaning positions. Thank you.